I keep getting accused of using AI, so I hope this is organic enough for you. Let's talk money again, but this time, just the tip. As in, Mikey Ibarra, former president of Blizzard, thinks tipping game creators $10 or $20 on top of the $70 price is a great idea because, quote, some games are that special. Mind you, he was talking about primarily single-player games like Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, Red Dead Red 2-Ed, Baldur's Gate 3, etc. So I am taking his desire to tip at face value, a nicety. That's nice, honey, until it turns into necessity, which inevitably happens to economies that rely on gratuity. Not every economy swaps to tipping, but in the words of Prince, this industry is not run by artists, it's run by accountants and lawyers. What they're looking for are acts that are going to make the most money for them. Healthy tipping does exist, it just tends to be outside of America. The boss provides proper wages and fair pricing, people are employed for their aptitude, and the customers can express excess gratitude without pressure. That's why it's called gratuity. When tipping is mandatory, well, that's just called the price. It's lies. The boss lies about wages, the employees lie about how nice it is to work here and how happy they are to see you again, and the customer lies to themselves about how generous they are. I don't know what it's like to serve a short-lived presidential term at Blizzard, but I did work 2 jobs that subsidized employee pay with tipping. One was as a server at a Waffle House, where tipping's the norm, and the other was as a lumper in a warehouse, which is normal by no one's standards. A lumper is what you call a person who loads and unloads product from trucks. In both cases, there was potential for a beneficial win-win scenario, where employers keep costs down and employees make 2 or 3 times more money than minimum wage for what is considered a low-skill entry-level position. Because the boss ain't paying the workers themselves, the company gets to say they make less than what they're really making, so the landlord doesn't increase the cost of rent, while also advertising higher pay on job sites to keep people churning through. Normally, no one would want to do these jobs because they're the only ones that legally pay less than the federal minimum wage. But the potential for higher pay is a worthwhile gamble for people who can make it work. Making it work doesn't necessarily mean doing a better job. As far as restaurants go, servers relying on tips are sugar babies. No one really cares about exemplary service, they just hate bad service. So it ain't work ethic that gets you more tips so much as working the people tipping you. I normally worked in back-of-the-house positions before I decided to become a server to get better familiarized with the whole industry. So my tableside manners were underdeveloped, to put it nicely. So it wasn't long before I was up for evaluation. The HR-approved way of saying about to be put down. Because the site had to pay me the difference if I wasn't making at least minimum wage. Firing someone because you refuse to pay a standard wage is criminal, but it's legal when framed as underperformance. So I turned out the Latino heat on the grannies. I told the old factory dogs my dreams of making a landscaping company with nothing but my bootstraps, and gave out free food to the high schoolers. And the way I saw it, the customer was paying more for my loyalty than Waffle House. Never mind that upcharging $1.10 for an extra slice of toast was robbery in itself. Service fought for specific customers, and management always had issues keeping costs down from all the freebies going around. Before and after I worked there, I didn't break the system, it was broken when I got there. On the game development side of things, much like the food industry, tipping culture can incentivize prioritizing public perception over the skill of a developer. Imagine designing games not because you have a strong vision, but because you strongly believe in appealing to people who have lots of followers on streams, YouTube, or TikTok in the hopes that their audience will also buy in. Now add a tipping feature and the incentives go up. There's already considerable outside influence with the current collaboration culture going on in multiplayer live service games. Wouldn't take much to turn creator codes into community tipping jars. This is why I'm okay with giving my opinion on games, but rarely do I use actionable phrases like here's how I'd fix it or here's what I would have done. I've made offhand remarks like that before, not knowing devs were listening in, and they immediately expedited my suggestions. I love the willingness to hear the audience out, but don't compromise your vision just to try and gain my favor. Now here's the other scenario. The warehouse job was even worse because there was no one to woo. We were kept as far away from the public as possible. The way people made money there was good old-fashioned lying on the paperwork. Firstly, you'd give higher estimates of how much time and money it took to fix a load. Secondly, sometimes truckers felt generous after being saved the perceived inconvenience and tipped for exceptional service, which was really the standard rate and price all along. I'll pay lip service to people in passing, or give an extra heavy-handed scoop of gravy any day of the week. But you're not going to catch me lying on anything that can be traced back to me. Not only was I underperforming, in air quotes, I was doing 3 times worse than everyone else because their rates were inflated. All the numbers were out of whack, and everything was founded on those numbers. The hiring rates, the performance standards, the employee evaluations, the projected earnings. The tipping culture fostered a lying culture, a dangerous one at that. We were working with a rough crowd. The new hires that didn't like skewing numbers had a strange habit of getting into workplace accidents or getting into fights they didn't start. And the managers were in on it too. So they wrote up the people who weren't willing to fall in line and fired them for underperforming. I remember my director's last words to me before I left. "You think you're the only honest man here?" "Nah," I said. "I like the same as everyone else, if not more. I just know what my lies are worth." Seems we were in agreement because he ended up getting fired and sued for embezzlement. Months later, the whole company was sued for breaking fair labor standards. Imagine all that effort just to avoid paying a standard living wage. Personally, I don't think it's worth the headache. And a lot of non-American countries agree, having opted out or never accepting gratuity culture altogether. If tipping were introduced to gaming, even if it started off okay, it wouldn't take long before accountants factored in people's generosity and projections and hung it over the developers' heads. Don't forget, in 2010, Obsidian was to receive a bonus if Fallout New Vegas received a Metacritic score of 85 or higher. But they fell short of it by 1 point. Executives already have a history of obsessing over the most arbitrary factors imaginable, and tips aren't arbitrary. That's cold hard cash. What's to stop publishers from forcing tipping options on smaller studios? I don't even want to get into the logistics of how the tips would make it straight to the developer's hands and then somehow avoid being sucked up by the publisher. Even if it works, then that raises the money goals to a new high and they'll have to rely on tips again and again until it doesn't work anymore. In which case, the publishers eat the studio. And don't get me wrong, as much as I love solo indie developers receiving their worth and would love to give people like Punkle an extra $5 whenever I get another 100 hours under my belt in Vampire Survivors, it would just devalue the game. Even Mike Ybarra was saying he wanted to tip because the game didn't try to nickel and dime him. If it had a tipping feature, it would just be seen as nickel and diming. Man makes too much money to make this much sense. People already hesitate to pay full price for indie games. How do they avoid being bullied into selling their game for low prices with added tipping, or made to release free-to-play games and rely on the gratuity features? And if that doesn't cut it, then they die or rely on sponsors. Do you really want to see Raid Shadow Legends ads in your non-Raid Shadow Legends games? To put things into perspective, Mike Ybarra is the Blizzard president that defended Diablo Immortal's monetization. And he's saying sometimes games are so special they make him, a man who makes 6 figures minimum, consider tipping an extra $10 or $20 on top of a $70 game. But that only amounts to a 14 to 28% tip for the most special of games. Are they not special enough to consider a standard living wage, or simply buying the game again and giving the copy to somebody else? It's genuinely difficult to listen to people with too much money. Even when the rich talk about acts of generosity, they always come off as so frugal relative to their own worth. And it always sounds like they're trying to sell me something.
This video is sponsored by Let Bygones Be Bygones, the atmospheric future noir thriller launching on April 30th. Channel your inner Blade Runner and solve one last case in this stylish, choice-driven RPG. Create a unique story as you forge your own path through the dystopian city planet Terra Hive. Will you use logic to deduce the facts? Connect with people on an emotional level, or just pull out your gun and cause a bit of chaos? There are no wrong choices here, only the consequences of your actions. Just like that time you watched Finding Nemo and decided that it would be a great idea to put a saltwater fish tank in your studio apartment. Now you're not getting your deposit or that axolotl back. Let Bygones Be Bygones launches on April 30th, so head on over to the Steam page to wishlist the game and get your hands on the demo now.